I mean, is there really a question of which land Moses was talking about? For 3,000 years, we've said next year in Jerusalem, not next year in Boulder or the Bay Area. The ideal state of the Jews, as spelled out in the Torah, and the Nevi'im, and the prophets, and the prayers, is to be ingathered into Israel. That we have not done that, or that that's not happened, is a different issue. But I think it's clear, obviously, that the land that Moses was talking about was Canaan. The subtitle of the panel is, you may be shocked to hear that diaspora negation has been one of Zionism's defining characteristics. In other words, Jews should not live outside the land of Israel. Is that so? And what I want to do today with the panel, with Bret Stephens of the New York Times, Anshel Pfeffer from Haaretz, Sara Cohen, who writes for Makor Rishon, and also has an organization called My Israel, I want to discuss these issues about the role of that diaspora. I thought about this question during a visit I had in June in Bahrain. I was one of a handful of Israeli journalists who were allowed to go into Bahrain in June to cover Jared Kushner's conference, economic conference for Trump's peace plan. And at that conference, there was a minyan of religious Jews. There was about 15 religious Jews, and somebody came up with the idea we should go ask the authorities to open up the synagogue in Bahrain. There's an unmarked synagogue in Bahrain, and have a minyan there. Daven, let's have a service there. The Bahrainis agreed, and there was a weekday, they agreed, and we had a weekday morning minyan in Manama in Bahrain, the first time that's happened since 1967. And it was interesting, right? There were 15 Jews after the davening. The people who were there, they danced around in talis and tefillin singing Am Yisrael Chai, right? The people of Israel live. There was a degree of poignancy in that. A clip of that, somebody filmed a clip and they sent it to Israel, and that for a few hours that was on the news, right? That here we are, the Jews are back in Bahrain, right? That they've returned to Bahrain. I was interviewed by a Haredi radio station, and the guy said, so there you were in the ancient synagogue in Bahrain, where there was boundless joy from the worshipers, and the Haredi advisor to Donald Trump was also there. And I was thinking, I took that question, I thought there's only 3 problems with that question. First of all, the synagogue's not ancient, right? It's 100, or not even 100 years old, it's 80 years old. There wasn't exactly boundless joy. You know, a couple of Jews dancing around the beam is not boundless joy. And Jared Kushner, I'm not sure that he would characterize himself as the Haredi advisor to Donald Trump.
Oh, no, and he didn't even come to Davin.
No, he did come to Davin. No, Greenblatt came. Not
but Jared didn't come.
Jared didn't come, but Greenblatt came, right? So outside of that, it was a tremendous question. But it got me thinking. The interviewer seemed to be excited about the prospect of Jewish life returning to Bahrain, right? But is that really what I want? I mean, do I want to see a return or rebirth of the Jewish community in Bahrain? For what purpose? Just because once there were Jews there? But forget about Bahrain. Recently, last week I was driving in Pennsylvania, where there used to be strong Jewish communities in some of the Rust Belt towns like Altoona. There were 3 synagogues at one time in Altoona, now there's a half a synagogue. And I started to think, should I be sad about this, or should I be glad about this? I mean, is this the natural trajectory of the Jewish people? So what is it? I mean, should Jews be in Altoona or in Afula? Should they be in Beersheba or in Bahrain? And for that, I want to ask Bret. Bret, what do you think? Where is where is it preferable that the Jewish people actually live?
Well, at the New York Times, obviously. Look, I mean, I think the answer is Jews should live anywhere they want to live. I mean, it's as simple as that. You know, far be it from me to suggest that as a child of the diaspora and as someone who has chosen to make his life in America, even though I spent a number of years, as you and Anshel well know, in Israel, as someone who's chosen to make his life in the United States, I would be the last one to gainsay the right of every American Jew to live wherever they want. And in a sense, I think it's a bit of a false question. I mean, look, there are places, there are Jewish communities around the world which I think are living on borrowed time. And I suspect that that's true of many Jewish communities in Europe, although I'm sure Anshel might disagree. You know, the real point is isn't where Jews should live. The question is, how does a Jewish community living in different places around the world work to strengthen every other side and place of the Jewish world, both geographically and across other sorts of ethnic and even religious divides? I think that's really the urgent question. I mean, you've heard from people like Danny Gordis and others talking about this split in the Jewish world, and what we ought to be thinking about is what do we as American Jews, or those of us in this room who are American Jews, what are our profound obligations to our cousins, and in my case, literally our cousins in Israel, and what, by the same token, are the obligations of Israeli Jews to those of us who are in the diaspora? That strikes me as really the productive conversation. Debating where Jews should live isn't going to get a single Jew to move from one place to the other.
Right. It won't, but it has been. I mean, Zionism, the idea, early Zionists thought that once you have a state of Israel, there won't be a need for the diaspora. Sara, let me ask you a question that Bret brought up. What obligations forget the obligations of diaspora Jews to Israel, what obligations do Israeli Jews have to the diaspora? There's a lot of talk about the expense of Jewish education, that the American Jews would like to send their kids to schools, but they can't afford it. Now there's this whole new issue about security at synagogues. Should Israel take it upon itself now to help fund that for the diaspora communities?
To a certain extent, of course. I mean, Israel and America is not, like, the Jewish communities in America are thriving, and the more challenging, I know that we're talking about 2 centers here, but there are more centers of Judaism around the world, and they are also under a lot of pressure and a lot of both security, but also identity. So, of course, that the state of Israel, after more than 70 years, has responsibility upon our brothers and sisters across the ocean. Up to a certain extent that, of course, we have our own, like, people, we need to take care of our own state, and we have poverty, and we need to our health system is under pressure now, and we do have a lot of problems, but we still need to take responsibility because we're not kids any longer.
I mean, so does that taking responsibility mean that Israeli taxpayers should help to pay for these things?
It's a big debate. It's a big debate in Israel. You could see that Israel now has a diaspora ministry. It hasn't been before. And the diaspora minister used to be, until not long ago, Naftali Bennett, who's now the security minister. But Israel do feel that we should take responsibility, and if funding is a part of the puzzle, so we should take this responsibility as well. It is a debate in Israel.
Anshel, let me ask you another question. The early Zionist thinkers thought that with the advent of the Jewish state, with the creation of Israel, the diaspora would disappear. A lot of people thought that. It didn't. It didn't disappear, as we all know. Is that a failure of Zionism, or is it a failure of the diaspora?
No,
let me just sharpen that question by just one interesting statistic that I saw. Since the creation of the state, 150,000 Americans have made Aliyah, right? 150,000 out of a community of 6 million. That's nothing. So had 250,000 American Jews come to Israel after the Six-Day War, the country would look dramatically different. But they didn't come. So who failed whom?
I don't think anybody failed anybody. And I think that if we take a less nostalgic and more realistic look at the history of Zionism, Zionism was not originally designed as the Zionist project of building a sovereign state for Jews in the Promised Land was not seen as an answer for all the Jews. It was seen as an answer for the Jews who were being persecuted in the Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe. It was very much a solution for a specific community or area in which Jews lived. It was not seen as a solution for if you read Herzl, and if you read Herzl's diaries and the negotiations he was having with the Turks and with the Germans and with the British, it was designed as a solution for Eastern European Jews, who were the Jews under threat of pogroms in the Tsarist Empire. It wasn't seen as being an answer for all Jews. The talk of Zionism and of Israel being the place where every Jew has to be is a later evolution of Zionism. It's much more something which came about in sort of an answer to communism and an answer to various other ideologies of the late 19th and 20th century, when people talked of universal solutions for man. So some Jews became communists and some Jews became Zionists and said, this is what everyone should be thinking of. So everyone should be thinking of life in Israel. But when we use the words of failure, I think that's just exactly the wrong terms to use, because what we have today in the Jewish world are two massive, unprecedented success stories that our grandparents and our great-grandparents couldn't have imagined. We have in the last 70 years built a state, a sovereign state, which is successful. It can sustain itself, even though it does get a lot of help from America. It doesn't necessarily need that help. And Israel's got some of the things that we can't talk about openly and some of the we can talk about openly. It hasn't got borders, it hasn't got a constitution with those two things Israel needs, but it's a success story, even though we can be critical of that success. And on the other side, we have this incredible success story of American Jewry, of a community living as a minority, but with unprecedented levels of integration and influence and success in every field, from finance to academia to government to the media. I mean, occasionally Jews don't do that well in the media, but there are some good examples. And this is something that I think Jews in America 70, 80 years ago couldn't have dreamt of either. So we have two massive success stories, and we're a nation which over the last 2,000 years hasn't had that much success of this kind of reaching these levels of power and influence. We're a nation in which knew persecution and suffering and pogroms and genocide, and having to keep both metaphorically and physically suitcases packed and ready to run when the Cossacks were coming. And suddenly we've got two success stories to deal with, and we're not used to success. And the moment we have success, we're like, oh, who's going to come and take it away from us? We don't deserve the success. It's not something that we know how to handle. And I wouldn't say it's a tragedy, but it's perhaps an irony that the successes seem to be almost contradict each other, to be almost rebuking each other. That Israelis think those American Jews, they shouldn't be so successful in America, because the only place Jews should be successful is in the sovereign state of Israel. And I think in some ways American Jews feel also a sort of resentment towards Israelis, saying, well, we've built this Jewish homeland here in America, but the Israelis are doing something else, and that's sort of a challenge to our success story. Maybe they've got it right and we've got it wrong. And if we've got it right, then maybe they've got it wrong. And these are all losing arguments. These are two huge success stories, and we should be happy as Israelis, we should be happy for the success story of American Jewry, and Western diaspora is smaller communities, but still great success stories, and vice versa. And a lot of this, we're having all these conversations, all these conferences about the rift and the crisis between Israel and diaspora. There doesn't really need to be a crisis. These are two incredible success stories, which we shouldn't have to apologize for.
I think that's all very well said. The thing is, American Jewish success is success as Americans more than it is success as Jews. And I think that is a deep issue. That is to say that I'm guessing that almost everyone in this room has had a very successful career, happy life as fully integrated American citizens. Whether everyone has done so as a Jew, I know, speaking for myself, that's probably not the case. I sometimes wonder whether the story in Israel is whether it's been more successful as a Jewish community than as an Israeli one, which is to say, to embrace an identity that goes slightly beyond the purely Jewish identity. But I think there's a question of what you mean by success.
I think success for Jews is, first of all, that we've survived. But we've survived for 3 generations, both in Jews in America and Jews in a level of prosperity, with a level of increasing prosperity, with a level of increasing security. And we're asking ourselves almost every day, can we take this for granted? Is this real? And even though our generation, we're both of a generations which were born into, I wasn't born in Israel, but I've been in Israel since I was a kid, and your generation, we've sort of felt that we can take this for granted, but we've still inherited this sort of this gene or this reflex that asks ourselves, hold on, is this real? Is this lasting? And it creates this constant tension, and we're thinking, who's got the right formula, the Israelis or the American Jews? And I think they're both great formulas. And I agree that you succeed in America, not necessarily as a Jew, but the fact is America has sustained 6, 7, or 8 million Jews for a century or so.
Well, I mean, that's the story. It sustained 6 million Jews for a century now.
That's a difficult number, yeah.
Well, it's a difficult number, but it also is a telling number because it suggests that there's some limit, and after which the Jewish community dissipates through assimilation, intermarriage, and a lack of affiliation with their identity as Jews.
That's a self-imposed number. It's the first time that the number's not being imposed from the outside. And when we talk today about anti-Semitism, we're not talking about governments coming and telling us, well, you can't live in this part of town or in this part of the country, and you can't have X number of people in the university, you can't be in certain professions. So American Jews and most Jews in the West are not living in that situation anymore and haven't been, by and large, at least for 70, 80 years. And Israel, as a Jewish community, you said, certainly doesn't have those limits.
But Anshel, you said that you judge success by survival, right?
No,
we've survived.
I was being slightly cynical, but
because then the question.
But that is the original. That would have been the original. You ask our grandparents, how would you measure Jewish success? First of all, keep alive.
But Israel's success is not surviving; it's thriving. This is how we measure success in Israel.
But 72 years ago, the first requirement for Israel was to survive. When Ben Gurion's first meeting, minutes after he proclaimed the state of Israel, the independence, was with the heads of the Haganah, which
so we're in two different situations.
That was 72 years ago.
No, I'm talking about today. As for us, for Israelis, the success means to thrive. The big question: what is a success for the Jewish communities outside of Israel? Now, I think that the question of where should Jews live is, I don't see any. They should live anywhere they want, but the question is, what is the relationship between the state of Israel? It's a fact, and the Jewish diaspora. Now, we just read the Lech Lecha parasha in the last weekend, and for more than 2,000 years, the whole Jewish tradition aimed to Eretz Israel, that the Jewish nation should build a state and should build a country, and in the last 73 years, it's a fact. So it's not a matter of profit, it's not a matter of belief, it's a fact. Now, one of the main questions for Jewish diaspora is, are we a part of this thing that's called Israel, the Jewish state, or aren't we? And I find it very challenging. In recent years more, but
that raises an interesting question, and that's what's the value of the diaspora? Is the diaspora only there to serve Israel, or does the diaspora communities have value on their own per se? Right?
So this was also a debate in the Zionist movement. You can look on Echad Ha'am, who talked about Shlilat Hagalut and not Shlilat Hagolah. Sorry, I don't know how to say it.
Negation of diaspora.
No, but can you negate the diaspora ideologically and not negate diaspora Jews? Because I think that's a problem Israelis get into, right? They negate the diaspora, and they come across as arrogant because they're saying that the diaspora Jews, like you said, the purpose is, some people believe the purpose is to serve Israel. That's rather arrogant.
I don't think the word serve is a good word. I don't look for servants. I look for relationship and I look for partnership. I don't look for someone who'll work for me. I do think that you cannot ignore that one of the big and main focuses in history of the Jewish people is very dramatically, and it happens today in Israel. So the big question is how do you build the relationship? I don't look for servants, but I do look for partnership, and it's a big challenge.
Bret, what do you think the responsibility is of the diaspora to Israel?
Well, I think the first responsibility is to pony up tons of dough.
Is what?
So how's that going?
Actually, pretty well. No, look, I think the real responsibility is to be cognizant of the unique dilemma or dilemmas that Israelis face. And I find a lot of the commentary, sometimes coming from diaspora Jews, to be superficial and fairly cheap.
In what sense? What are you talking about?
Well, I mean, let's take an example from about a year ago when those protests in Gaza at the fence started taking place. And in certain corners of the American Jewish diaspora, there was a great, kind of wringing of hands, like, oh dear, we're shooting at these, or we, Israelis, are shooting at these protesters. We, as Jews, feel somehow complicit. Make it stop, make it stop. And I've just challenged, and I did so in a number of columns, some of the people saying this, saying, well, how? By all means, Lieutenant Colonel, Jewish pundit X, tell the Israeli army what's the special formula for preventing 10,000 protesters from breaching a fence, perhaps occupying an Israeli town, creating a situation, possibly taking hostages. How do you resolve that? I mean, do you have a special weapon that that you've developed in your garage, or do you have a brilliant diplomatic formula other than sort of pleading, you're making me feel bad as a Jew because you are faced with the exigencies of statehood that I'm not faced with, and I feel somehow guilty, and it's making my skin itch a little and making it difficult to conduct conversation at my, with my tennis partners in Greenwich. And I find that profoundly objectionable. Look, the Jews of the diaspora have been removed from political life, right? And for 2,000 years, Jews never exercised that kind of sovereign responsibility. Even if, the Henry Kissingers of the world exercise it in the name of some other entity, we never really exercised it for ourselves. And by some bad joke by God, after 2,000 years of not having this responsibility, not only were we returned, or were Israeli Jews returned to the responsibilities of statehood, but they were returned in just about the most difficult place where that can be conducted. I sometimes feel like there should have been some kind of starter course, like a portion of Iceland should have been, is like, go and take care of issues like fisheries, the occasional volcanic eruption, figure that out, and then we'll kind of ease you back into the hard stuff, like, the Palestinian conflict, enemies on 7 sides, et cetera, et cetera. But no, the Jews, they dived straight into the deep end, and that's difficult. And I don't think American Jews sometimes sufficiently appreciate it. Look, whether you like Bibi, hate Bibi, however you felt about Olmert, any single prime minister, all these prime ministers wake up in the morning and some staff aide hands them a menu and says, here are your choices. There's bad, 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 and worse, 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 but it's not entirely clear which is bad and which is worse. Please choose. And in the meantime, try not to make American Jews feel bad, right? And I think we owe it to Israel, not necessarily to agree with everything they do, right? And certainly not to hold our tongues, but at least to engage that conversation with a level of deep understanding that those dilemmas are very hard and that Israeli leaders are not simply acting in bad faith.
So let me ask you this question, going on to what Bret said. Netanyahu comes to Congress and he gives a speech against Iran, and makes American Jews feel uncomfortable, many American Jews feel uncomfortable. Should that consideration have come into his decision-making process? Should he have thought before making a decision to speak in Congress that what he does might make American Jews feel politically or socially uncomfortable?
I think that shouldn't have been part of his consideration, because this wasn't anything to do with America. It wasn't anything to do with American Jews, or even anything to do with the Iran deal. This was a election gimmick. It was what you were there. What,
Yeah.
two and a half weeks before the election. This was nothing but an election gimmick. This is the biggest platform that he could have commandeered.
Okay.
And it wasn't even in Israel, but it was the best and biggest platform for a candidate running in what was then a very close election.
But so forget.
That was all there was anything to do. The American Jews didn't even come into the equation.
But so forget that particular incident in Congress. But the whole argument that he had with Obama, a frontal argument with the President of the United States, which made Jews feel uncomfortable. Should that come into his thinking?
No, I don't think it should have. It didn't. I don't think it should have. I think he was wrong to do that, because I'm very critical of Netanyahu's policy in the way he engaged with that specific issue. I don't think Obama's policy was very good either, but there's the two different issues. But no Israeli prime minister has an obligation to put American Jews or any diaspora Jews first. They are not his first consideration. They're not his second consideration. And I think that an Israeli prime minister has a sacred duty towards all the Jews of the world to do one thing: to safeguard Israel as a possible future haven for the Jews around the world, because most of the Jews don't need Israel today. Hopefully they won't tomorrow, but who knows? And that's Israel's raison d'etre. So I think a prime minister of Israel should consider American Jews, should consider other Jews, but at the end of the day, that is not his or her main consideration is preserving Israel's security. I don't think Netanyahu has gone about doing it very well in recent years. There's a different question. But when Ehud Olmert launched the Lebanon war disastrously, should he have thought that this would lead to the massive anti-Jewish demonstration on the streets of London and Paris, which were happening at the same time? That's really not part of what an Israeli prime minister needs to think about.
You agree with that, Bret?
Oh, yes. By the way, I think that was Netanyahu's finest hour.
What, the speech to Congress?
Yeah.
Well, let me unpack that for a minute. It was the finest hour. First of all, I mean, it didn't help, right? Obama went ahead, and some would argue that was the moment where he lost the Democrats.
I'll never forget, I was then at the Wall Street Journal, a visit from a very senior Saudi person who came and said, "I can't believe it. I agreed with every word that the Prime Minister of Israel said." And if you want to date the moment when the great Israeli Sunni rapprochement began, I think it would be that speech. Because finally, the Prime Minister of Israel was saying what these Arab potentates didn't have the nerve to say. And I think that was important. And by the way, you know, this whole business, how dare Bibi interfere in American politics? A couple points. Congress, as Democrats are now being reminded, are a separate branch of government. At the time, the Congress was in the hands of the Republican Party. It was an invitation from the Speaker of the House, right? Right now, Democrats are saying, "Hey, we're not chicken liver." So, you know, that's point number one. Point number two, I can't remember an American president who hasn't freely put his finger on the scales of Israeli politics. Bill Clinton sent his pollsters to go do Ehud Barak's campaign in 1999, and nobody batted an eyelid. So what was really the objection was, why does this, quote, client state have the chutzpah to speak up and demand that a deal which was toxic for Israel's interests, and by the way, it was toxic for Israel's interests. How do you know? How do you know? Because when Iran has decided to breach the JCPOA's limits, what are they doing? They're restarting that plant at Fordo, buried deep underground, which any sensible deal should have put out of commission entirely. So
So Bret, so for you, that speech was a disaster. Anshel, you said, I mean, for you, that speech
No,
was good. Anshel, you said it was a
brilliant.
disaster.
It was a brilliant election gimmick. It
Let me
certainly won in the
disagree with
election.
Anshel. Let me disagree with Anshel. We just saw in the last elections, well, I think it was the first round, whatever, I kind of lost it with the Israeli elections, but we saw that Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu had a speech in AIPAC. On the same morning, there was rockets on the area of Tel Aviv, northern to Tel Aviv, and he canceled everything, even though it was very precious for his campaign. So he canceled everything, and he came back to Israel because it was the right thing to do, as he thought. Now,
But that's
I don't wanna
after he
be
went to the
that-
White House and got the Golan Heights. I mean, it's, he already got what he wanted for the election.
Yeah, and different.
I mean-
and Bibi uses different gimmicks for different elections. It's not, you know.
I mean,
he's
the
not.
Golan Heights-
He's a
the
multi-dimensional
Golan Heights
3D
is-
campaigner.
give me elections every 3 months if the Golan Heights is part of the campaign, please. I mean, this recognition served Israel and not Netanyahu. And even if it served Netanyahu and served Israel, I mean, that's why we're here. So I disagree with Anshel about the Congress speech. I think that Netanyahu has one thing upon his head, and this avoiding Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and he's doing everything to promote this. And this is the mission of the Prime Minister of Israel. The Prime Minister of Israel should recognize his acts, or her acts. I don't know if we'll have a woman, but upon the Jewish diaspora, but it shouldn't be in the first priority. The first priority is the responsibility, the future of Israel, and that's what he's elected for, and that's his first mission. So whether it's the speech in the Congress or anything else, this should be his first responsibility.
But I want to go back to the diaspora stuff for a minute, walk away from Bibi for a second, although it's difficult.
When you put Bibi in, you mix everything in.
In a provocative op-ed in 1987, Jacob Neusner in the Washington Post wrote that it's time to say that America is a better place to be a Jew than Jerusalem. If ever there was a promised land, he wrote, we Jewish Americans are living it. Here, Jews have flourished. Jews feel safe and secure in ways they do not and cannot in the state of Israel. And they have found an authentically Jewish voice here in America. For American Jews, now Jewish Americans, the American dream has come true. I wonder how many Israelis think the Zionist one has come true too. What do you think about that? Is it, it's better, it's easier, it's more fulfilling to be a Jew here than in Jerusalem?
I don't think that's true today, and I don't think it was true in 1987. Look, I remember reading somewhere, Israelis score very high on those happiness index reports that come out periodically from whoever issues them. And it's an interesting question. Well, how is that possible? I mean, every Israeli mother and father sends their children to an army where there's a real risk of conflict. There's a constant threat of terror of one kind or another. It's a materially, even today, poor country. And I think the answer is that, I mean, if you sort of read kind of Aristotle, if you think about what happiness is about, happiness is not fun. Happiness is purpose. And happiness is marrying your activity to a sense of purpose and the institutions that generate that feeling of purpose in a way that creates meaning in your life. I mean, I'm very fortunate to have had a career where I feel that purpose, but I think that American life in general is in fact by design constructed not to give you that sense of purpose. I mean, as an American, you kind of have to figure it out for yourself. You live in this land of almost infinite choice, which is, great if you're choosing coffee makers. Just get the German one. but not so great when you're trying to kind of figure out, well, what are you going to do with your life? And one of the things I notice about Israel, and this is kind of, whenever I'm in Israel, you sense people who kind of know what they're about. And there's something, and I'm speaking, in this sense, even though I live there as an outsider, you get that feeling that they know what they're for. They know who their enemies are. They know what they've got to do. There is a quality of unity, and even in all of the mishugas, all of the, the to and froing, a sense of in-it-togetherness that doesn't exist here. And I think that is a fulfilling and enriching way of living life that is not so automatic here in the United States. Only like a rank materialist would think that American Jews should be happier because we have more stuff, right? I don't think that's why that's a very impoverished vision of what a happy and fulfilling life ought to be. Just one brief remark. I was once at a World Economic Forum shindig in Davos, and I was chatting with this guy who was this French journalist, very anti-Israel, right? And I was chatting with him for a while. I was an editor of the Jerusalem Post at the time, and why are you so anti-Israel, this, that, and the other? And at some point, I just had a feeling, I said, I have to ask you, are you Jewish? And he said, yes. And I said, and have you been to Israel? He said, no. And I said, well, why not? He said, I'm afraid I'm going to like it.
About that happiness poll, we were ranked 11 this year by the UN. Yeah. And another thing I read about one of the reasons is, number one is the purpose. The second thing is you have your friends and your loved ones close. Right? Yeah. It's a small country. Everybody's within, very close thing, and that's also another ingredient of happiness. Newsner wrote what he wrote. Aleph Bet Yoshua, the Israeli author, made a comment in 2006 to the American Jewish Committee, essentially saying that you can only live a total Jewish life in Israel because, like you said, that's where the decisions are being made. Life is encompassed by, it's all Jewish. You can only live a total Jewish life in Israel. There's no compartmentalization. You're not a Jew at home and a Jew at home and somebody else in the street, a Jew at home and somebody else in the office. And then he said something that caused a big ruckus. He said, essentially, Jews in the diaspora are, play acting. The real action is taking place in Israel. Sara, what do you think of that? Do you think that diaspora Jews are acting, being Jews, because they're not where the action is?
I was exposed to the Jewish diaspora after the army. I grew up in Kiryat Arba. It's a small settlement next to Hebron, and now I live now in Jerusalem. And I lived totally full Israeli life in my personal level. And I discovered the Jewish communities in North America after the army when I went on shlichut to Camp Ramah in Wisconsin. And it was an eyes-opening experience for me. I actually discovered a whole new world that I never knew before. And I continued to 2 more summers. Afterwards, I met my husband there in the same mishlachat the year after. So it happens at Ramah. And so I discovered the very rich world of Jews in the States, in North America. Afterwards, I also discovered more communities in Australia and South Africa because I used to work in a youth movement. And I do acknowledge the very rich world of Jewish communities, and I do think that the real thing is Israel. And I think Israelis should understand more deeply the challenges that the Jewish diaspora is facing in religious life, in personal life, in every level of life they have. I do think that, Israel is a thriving. Why am I not afraid of people leaving Israel? Well, there was a big talk about the Milky in Berlin. Like Milky is a, how do they call it?
The Milky protest.
Milky is
pudding.
Is a brand. So it's cheaper in Berlin, so we'll move to Berlin. I'm not afraid of it. You know why? Because Israel is awesome. Really. Israel is awesome. Now, if you want to leave, leave. But we'll keep on building this amazing state and to build, and that's why I said it's also our responsibility to build the connection and relationship with Jewish diaspora around the world, not only in the United States, because Israel is awesome, and it's a thriving state. It's a thriving democracy in this jungle of the Middle East. It's not perfect, but yeah, wow, it's amazing. Look at our surroundings. So I do think it's our responsibility to build this connection because of our force, because of our strength.
Just an anecdote about the Milky protest. You always read, every few months, you read stories about a brain drain and how everybody's leaving. All the brilliant people are coming to Silicon Valley or going to Berlin. And you better watch out because the country's going to leave. I made Aliyah 35 years ago. There were 3.2 million Jews and 4 million people. Now there's 6.7 million Jews and 9 million people. And that's in the span of the time that I've been there. So you got to take everything in perspective. Anshel, let me ask you a question. You've got different realities. We like to say we're one people, but we live in completely different realities. We live in the most unhospitable neighborhood in the world where we were seriously worried about personal security, right? And the security of the country. American Jews, thank God, live in the most benevolent society the Jewish people have ever been in. They're different realities. When you live in different realities, you see things differently. How can we understand the realities? Because they don't understand ours in Israel, and we don't understand the reality in America. We don't understand the degree that immigration is in the DNA of the Jews, and we don't hear the dog whistles that they hear. Is there any way to make those realities understood to both sides?
Well, I mean, you said beginning that 150,000 American Jews have made Aliyah in the last 72 years, and it's a tiny proportion of this massive Jewish community. And the Jews who did move to Israel moved from North Africa and Eastern Europe, more or less. So that's 90-something% of Israelis did not come from Western societies, did not come from democracies, came from the opposite of democracies. And as Bret said, and we were thrown into the deep end of Palestinian conflict and Arab-Israeli wars. And so we were also thrown into the deep end in the sense that we were expected, for some reason, to have a perfect democracy from day one. And in many ways, it's a fantastic democracy. It's got freedom of press and freedom of expression and a really combative and contrarian media, and the elections are trusted. Not that many countries do you believe that what is put out by the election commission on the day after the election is really what people voted for, and there wasn't any kind of monkey business being done in the ballot boxes. And Netanyahu has tried to ruin that in this last election by trying to say that there's fraud. But until now, most Israelis have trusted the electoral system, an independent judiciary. So all these things, I think they're a miracle. The fact that the country which 90-something% of people who came to has achieved, and I come from a newspaper which is very critical of the miracle because we want it to be even better, but it's a miracle it's been achieved. There is no other country which achieved independence 72 years ago, when a lot of countries were getting independence, and has attained these levels of democracy. And all this with a population which did not have that experience. So I think because Israel is such a great success story, and I agree with Sara, it's awesome, Israeli democracy, where when it works, and within the Green Line, obviously, because outside that it's a military dictatorship. But when it works, it's fantastic, and it's all been done with people who don't have that experience, and that creates a sort of illusion that we have shared values and we can understand each other because Americans live in a democracy as well. But it's an illusion because at the end of the day, the experience which has defined Israeli life for the last 72 years has been building a state against adversity, mainly military adversity. It's been, as Bret mentioned, sending your kids to the army with the knowledge, and going yourself to with the knowledge that you could end up in 6 feet under. So that's the defining experience. And the defining experience of American Jews has been being part of America, of a much wider American society. It's a very different kind of experience. You're not building a state from scratch. You're not fighting that kind of adversity. You're finding different kinds of adversity, but very different experiences. So I think there is, while there's an illusion of shared values, an almost impossible gulf of different experiences to bridge, and the only way of doing that really is for both sides to be much more humble about lecturing each other and trying to understand, you know, what each side is facing. Right now, I think we're not humble enough to understand how different we are. We want to think that we're the same, and we want to impose our concepts on the other side, and that's always going to be a losing game.
I want to tell you why I'm here. Okay, I left 4 kids at home. I have an incredible husband, and my youngest is 9 months old, and I hate going out of Israel. I hate it. I hate leaving my kids. I always refuse. And then Amitai called me and said, listen, we need speakers from, not only from the left, we need speakers from the right side, haha. And I said, you know what, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to come. I don't want to leave my kids. Eventually, I'm here. And I'm here because I think that there are 2 vectors now. There's one vector of the Israeli society becoming more conservative. Demography is working, yeah. It's doing the change. And it's not only demography, it's also our experience from Oslo, from the intifadas, from, you know, very well experienced, and the Israeli public is very smart, very well experienced, and he knows what's good for him. And it's becoming more conservative as the Jewish communities, especially not only in the United States, but also in the United States, is becoming more liberal. Now it's 2 vectors that are not meeting each other, and it's growing exponentially. And I'm here to try and build bridges between this conservative, more center-right population in Israel and between the North America Jewish communities. I'm here to
But is it possible? Is it possible?
Of course it's possible. Of course, if not, I wouldn't leave my kids, okay? I'm a great believer. Yeah, clap, it's possible. I mean, we have no choice. Now, I hear my political base, and I hear the spirit, and I see where it goes to. It goes to, you know what, why should we, now I put it on, I'm generalizing. Why should we put any effort to Jewish diaspora? Why should we put any effort to Jewish communities in the States? They are lost. Okay, the intermarriage, or, you know, they don't like us, J Street, and they're very critical of Israel and stuff. Why should we put any energies to the Jewish communities? That's what I hear back at home. We should put all our energies into the evangelists, into CUFI. CUFI has 5 million members in it. So we should put all our energies there. And on the other side, I hear voices in Jewish diaspora that, you know, they're not talking to me, they're talking about me. Now, it's not me as Sara, but me as, like, the Israeli public. They're talking about us, they're not talking to us. Now, when they bring me to talk with them, like in groups when they come to Israel, I'm a leaf. So I'm just, they bring me just to you know, to say, yes, we have a right-wing voice. So we need to talk to each other. Even if we disagree, we need to put the big elephant in the center of the room, and we need to talk to each other. Now, if it means to leave my 4 kids at home and come here, so I'll do it. But I'm a great believer, so.
Thank you. We got to end. I just want to end with addressing another big elephant in the room, and that's, Bret, what's it like to be a pro-Israel voice in the New York Times?
So every now and then I go into the office and I'm in the elevator with one other person. And I'll stand there and that other person will stand there, the door will close, and they'll say, like your column. No, look, in all seriousness, when I was at the Journal, I thought the Journal and the Times were equivalent newspapers, in that they had roughly the same circulation. And I've realized that's not true. The Journal, if the Journal were a band, it would be the Grateful Dead. It's a cult band. You're either into it or you're just sort of vaguely aware of it, right? The Times is like the Beatles. Everyone participates, and even if I'm Ringo,
You're the fifth Beatle.
the point is the reach of the paper is formidable. It's astounding. It blows me away. And the paper is, I think, making a very honest and sincere effort to include more voices. Barry Weiss, my old friend from the Journal, is also a part of it. Mati Friedman, someone you can read in the Times now. And the Times has always had a tradition of having prominent dissenting voices on its opinion pages. And one of them was A.M. Rosenthal, of course, and another one was Bill Sapphire. And if I do anything at the Times is that I hope one day someone will say that I am at least attempting to be a worthy heir to them.
Thank you, Bret, Anshel, Sara. Thank you.
Thank you very much.